Thanks. No, yeah. Boker Tov. I want you to close your eyes. That's okay. The stream already started. We're on YouTube. All right. I want you to close your eyes. Take a breath and imagine you're lying in your bed. It's maybe 3 a.m. and your wife is sleeping next to you. You've had a long, exhausting day at work and you've got another one ahead of you, but you're a little anxious and having trouble sleeping. See, she's pregnant and you're excited about it, but you're also wondering how you're going to feed a third child. Work's been tough to come by lately because more and more employers aren't looking for people like you. In fact, your family's starting to get dirty looks in a neighborhood you've lived in for years. Your kids have begun to ask why people don't seem to like us as much anymore, and your wife has to avoid certain streets because of the way some of the young men will shout at her and the other women. Just breathe. Try to relax. It was worse. It was worse than this last year, and things calmed down then, and they'll calm down now, right? Listen for your wife's breathing. It's deep and even. She's asleep. You've always been the worrier, but the truth is she's got a better sense of these things than you do, and she's sleeping like a baby, right? So just go to sleep. As you close your eyes and turn over, you hear some glass break in the distance outside. You feel your body tense up, but you take a deep breath. It could have been anything. Then you begin to hear the voices shouting. Your wife reaches for your arm and pulls herself closer to you. The shouting's unmistakable now, and there are more crashes moving down the street in the direction of your house. You tell yourself, this can't be happening, not here. But even as the thoughts form, you're already out of bed and moving to the window. That's when you see them outside. You see a group of people surrounding your neighbor and beating him with clubs. His children are in the street. He's in his pajamas. Their faces, they seem crazed. Your wife is out of bed and going to the kids' room. They're awake and asking what's going on. They've noticed that things have been different, but you've tried to protect them. You haven't told them what's been happening to people like you all over the country. You get your family partly dressed, but you're starting to hear people outside your front door, and there's no more time to lose. You grab your 9-year-old son, your 6-year-old daughter. You hug your wife, and the 4 of you are out the back door into an alley just as the mob smashes your door in. You make your way through the back alleys, and as you're going through, occasionally you're catching glimpses through the houses of your friends and their families being assaulted by people with clubs and torches and kitchen implements. People are screaming, and you see blood, and there's fire and smoke. Houses are being burned. How is this happening? You recognize some of these attackers. They're people you see every day. These aren't strangers. They're people you buy groceries from, people you pass on the street who fix your roof, who you've done work for. You look into your kids' eyes and they're confused and terrified. Your wife's keeping it together. She believes you're going to protect her, but you're just trying to look strong. You have no idea where to go. You run around a corner and find yourself face to face with a big man in a police uniform. You begin to tell him about the commotion on the street, about the attacks and the fires and the looks in their eyes, and you keep talking to him as if he's a policeman, even as you realize that he's raising his club and bringing it down on your head, and now everything's dark. That was an excerpt from episode 1 of a podcast series called Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's by Daryl Cooper, and it's a little bit of a hot take, but I think it's a great podcast series. I think he comes to the wrong conclusion at the end. But what I like about this, I shouldn't say like, but what I think is useful about this is that it paints a very vivid picture about what life has been like for people at certain points in history. And it was real. That was real life. And that's not a fiction. It's not a story of a thing that happened somewhere. It's a end goal of an enemy that seeks to destroy us. And we know this because this is what we've seen. We've seen it happen. And a lot of you might know where that type of story that I was just speaking about came from, but if you don't, that's kind of pulled from the Russian pogroms, early 1900s. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is about community. Community is important But as we see in this example, community can be evil or it could be good. And the choice is really up to us. So if we can go to the next slide. I want to introduce to you guys this idea of mind viruses. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the verse for today, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We have a lot to say. We have a choice in what kind of community we live in and what kind of community we are. Next slide, please. So I want to introduce the idea of mind viruses. This isn't I didn't make this up. I think all of us that lived through COVID, we saw not just a physical contagion kind of taking over, but a social and one as well, right? That's not a rare phenomenon. As I mentioned earlier, we've seen this all throughout history, but communities can become infected or corrupted in the same way that our bodies become maybe infected by things. But in this case, it's ideas or attitudes or fears, resentments that spread from person to person and turn neighbors into enemies, just like in the example I read earlier. Next slide, please. So just like biological viruses, the way that those spread, the way that COVID spread, or maybe the flu spreads, right, from person to person, and we know that when people come together like we do here, we are at increased risk of exposure and getting the flu, and the flu has a better chance of spreading if we are coming together like this, but we still do it for a good reason. But in that same way, mind viruses also spread through community. And this isn't to say at all that we shouldn't do community, because of course we're called to community. So what do we do with this information? Let's think about what Paul said regarding bad doctrine around the resurrection. If we can go to 1 Corinthians 15. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. And then if we look at what he had to say in Galatians 2, when he was talking about false teachers spreading this idea that there was a requirement to follow Jewish law at the time for the Gentiles, he says a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And I think context is important here, because I love that metaphor of leaven, but he's talking about bad doctrine, bad teachings spreading throughout a community, right? So this is a thing that can happen, and the model for how it happens, I think, fits well with the model for how physical viruses spread, and that's why I'm trying to make a connection between the two. So if we go to the next slide, I'm bringing game theory back for everybody who's excited about that. Just a little bit of game theory. Thank you. You guys are so great. I'm kind of smashing it together. And this isn't just me. There's been a lot of social theory around there where we're looking at this concept called small world networks. I'm going to introduce that a little bit, and how game theory plays out in that scenario. So I want to go back to the bakery from the first sermon. Those of you that have been here for all three sermons are at a little bit of an advantage here, but you might recall that we talked about how rationally, and this is what game theory says, is that rationally, the strategy that we should engage in with the baker is to steal his bread, because that's optimal for us, and there's no cost. But rationally, if we iterate those interactions over time, if we have hundreds of interactions with that baker over time, the strategy changes. The strategy is we should be cooperative. We should buy the bread, and he should sell us good bread. He shouldn't sell us bad bread. And so what we see there is a representation of what we're taught by God through his word. We see that playing out even in a rational context, which I think is fascinating. But instead of that iterating over time, what I want to do instead with that scenario is zoom it out. Instead of just the baker, let's think about there's a baker, there's a cobbler, there's a mason, a blacksmith, and I don't know why I don't have any modern examples, but this is where my head's at with it. And we have a whole community of people that are interconnected, interdependent on each other voluntarily. And we can see how game theory might play out in that scenario. If the cobbler decides that he's just going to start trying to take advantage of everybody, what kind of effect might that have on the rest of the community? Could that have an impact on the baker, who then says, well, if the cobbler is taking advantage and he's really, coming out ahead of everybody else because he's kind of playing a different game, and he's being a little more shady or a little more sneaky about what he's doing, maybe I can start doing that too. Maybe I can start getting a little bit of an advantage. And then everybody else starts doing it, and pretty soon the whole thing starts to devolve into a society, into a community that's not really as effective or as good or as useful as it could have been. And this is where I want to talk a little bit now about small world networks. Yeah, thank you. So this is a social theory called small world. Now, a lot of you, first of all, how many have heard of small world networks? None of you, right? One person. Clark has always got my back. But how many of you heard of 6 Degrees of Separation from Kevin Bacon? Yeah, it's the same thing. So you guys have heard of it. The idea is that, obviously, if any of us are just 6 people removed from Kevin Bacon, the world's actually a lot smaller than we think it is, right? Yeah, especially, or maybe not Kevin Bacon, maybe you can choose anybody else. But in that context, we can imagine how, like, a physical virus like the flu, the more contact we have with each other, the less degrees of separation we have from each other, the more likely something like that can spread. The more maybe cloistered we are. I think about the Amish community but there might be other communities to think about, but the more cloistered you are, the more insulated you are maybe from things like that. And so people study this. And what they study is how cloistered versus how interconnected does it take before community becomes optimally, what's the word I'm looking for? Transmissive of viruses. And it doesn't take much. So if we can go back to that diagram, sorry, I'm going to stick on that for a little bit because I like it. Each of those dots kind of represents a person. And what you'll notice there on the left is that each person is connected to the people right next to them, and maybe also then to the people next to them. And so the number of steps, yeah, Bob, maybe you got to get closer, but the number of steps it would take if a virus infected that person at the very top of that left circle, the amount of steps it would have to take to get around that whole circle is pretty high. But now let's go all the way to the right, to that random circle. And that's a little harder to I think, conceptualize. But what's happening here is that the number of steps between people is smaller because it can jump from one end of the circle all the way to the other and spread from that direction as well. And it can spread from all these other looser connections. And so what a lot of us live in is this example of the small world, where we have a lot of close friendships, a lot of close relationships, probably about the people you spend 90% of the time with are all people that also spend a lot of that same time with the same people you're spending time with. Does that make sense? Okay, some of you followed me. That was a hard one to say. And some of those people are also connected maybe to other people that you don't even know, right? Some of your closest friends have friends or coworkers or whatever that you don't know, right? And that's where small world comes in. So those loose connections create a pipeline from one clump of people that are all interconnected to another clump of people that are all interconnected. And what this all leads to, I'm going to get out of the weeds of this for now, but what this leads to is that the idea that because of those pipelines, those looser connections, and we can go to the next slide, thank you. Because of those weaker connections, those looser connections, viruses can spread quickly, but also mind viruses can spread quickly. And when these same social scientists examine, late 1800s, early 1900s Russia, they see this dynamic playing out. The world had started to get smaller, and the world today is even smaller. Thinking about social media, the way we're all connected to each other through that, the way mind viruses might be able to spread through that, it's even a smaller world now. But what they saw back then is that it just took a few of those cobblers deciding that they're going to start trying to take advantage of people, and that negative impact that could have on a smaller community had an impact on a wider community because of those weaker ties, because of those pipelines of spreading that kind of defective attitude, that non-cooperative attitude. or fear-based attitudes or anti-Semitism, whatever it is. And so there was something that several of these scientists, independent of each other, would say is that they had this sense that society, as they were looking into this, is balanced on the edge of a knife. We don't realize how close we are to our entire systems devolving into that same kind of atmosphere that existed in early 1900s Russia. So what preserves us from that? Can we go to the next slide? So this picture that I've tried to build is this idea that when people make the choice, when we all make the choice to be cooperative or to be forgiving or to be self-sacrificing, from calling back to sermons 1 and 2, those strategies, if we adopt them as strategies and not just one-off interactions, but if we over and over and over adopt an attitude of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, of forgiveness, of grace, we can foster communities that are resilient and persevere even when our loose connections allow mind viruses to come in. Because it's not just if one person in our little community gets sick, if they're insulated with all of us around them calling it out, it might help them overcome that. And we'll see that here in a little bit. So if we can go to the next slide. I'm going to throw it back to Jordan Peterson real quick, because he I think has really useful ways of saying some of these things that are really hard to understand. But he identified that heaven and hell are real states of being in society. It's useful to think of it that way. I mean, they're also spiritual realities as well, but they exist on earth, and they exist through just us regular people, going about our days, making whatever decisions we make every day. And if we can go to Matthew 6:10 again, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I take that as a call to us. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And if we can go to Luke 17:21 to further evidence this, nor will they say, see here, see there, for indeed the kingdom of God is within you. All of us. So how do we tie this together? If we can go to the next slide. Those of you that were there heard me in part 1 talking a lot about forgiveness. Why forgiveness is a good strategy, a useful strategy. And I think by itself, that's useful. That's a useful thing to know and to practice. Part 2, we talked about sacrifice, self-sacrifice. Sacrificing of your resources, of your time, of your ego, and why and how we're called to that. But the reason why I talked about those things is not because those things them in and of themselves are useful. I think that's true. But my goal this whole time has been to get to this moment here where I say, we can engage in these activities together as a community, and through that achieve a harvest, even here at Beth Messiah. And for those of you on YouTube, whatever communities you're involved in. I talked about how forgiveness acts as the fertilizer. That's kind of weird, right? I don't think anybody's, I don't know. I haven't heard anybody else say that, but for some reason it makes sense to me. I see that as the strength of the community. So not well fertilized ground is going to have a harder time producing a lot of good fruit, right? The fertilizer really gives it some oomph, right? That's the strength. And then when I talked about self-sacrifice, being a little bit more like repeated tending of a garden, the weeding of the garden, the watering. And I see that as the resilience of a community. And so today, it's really just about harvest. There's no call to action like there was in those other two sermons. Today, it's just, we get to choose. So at the center of this, if we can go to the next slide, at the center of all of this, to me, is Yeshua himself, the true vine, as he called himself. And this is where I think the garden analogy finally really works. But if we can look at John 15, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. And if we can go to the next one, if you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. So through his sacrifice, we've been given the ability to create a better community. And of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but just in the context of this sermon, part of that, I think, is it allows us to be able to foster a community where we can say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we can make that real. And so, as I said at the beginning of this sermon, we have a choice. The choice is within all of us. We have a community. Will it be a fruitful garden? Will it be heaven on earth? Or a decaying garden? Much maybe like the one we talked about at the beginning of this. And that's it. We get to choose. Thanks.